All right, well, we are going to begin together, and I'm so glad that the 15 attendees are already here, and I suspect more folks will be dropping in as a follow-up to the conversation that Chuck was privileged to be able to have with so many of you while he was in Alaska. And the good news is that we have plans to return in February, February 21st to 23rd. We are hoping to be hosting a series of events in Alaska, starting in Anchorage together with the Alaska Design Forum. And so that's certainly something to be looking forward to. But our purpose today is to be able to take time to just grapple with some of the challenges as well as the unique things that are present in Alaska, and to work through that together with Chuck Marohn, as well as Representative or Assemblywoman Anna Brawley from District 3. And so I'm so glad to have you here. And I see just a continuing growth of attendees in the group. If you have a question, you can certainly use the features in Zoom, which allows you to raise your hand, as well as you can use the Q&A session, the Q&A section on the webinar interface to be able to drop your questions in there. If you just want them to be read out, I will be scanning through them and looking for those types of questions. And if you raise your hand and we have lots of time, what we'll be able to do is actually just call you onto the stage. There's a little bit of a process where I allow you to speak and also allow you to turn on your video if you like, and then that will bring you onto the stage and give you an opportunity to ask your questions. For the sake, because we do have a larger group, do try to keep your question as brief, or no, keep the question clear, but also limit the amount of preamble. Sometimes that can be where a lot of the time can go. But at the same time, what we want to be able to do is ask questions of not only Chuck Marohn, but just more broadly, what is it that we can be doing across Alaska and in other places, in communities that we know and care about, to build stronger communities. To that end, I want to then welcome Assemblymember Anna Brawley to share a few thoughts and comments with respect to her observations of the initial contact with Chuck and the Strong Towns team, as well as your thoughts on today's gathering.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for organizing this. It was really great to have Chuck up in Anchorage last month. I'll start with our prepared remarks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us during the lunch hour for this virtual Q&A. And thanks for folks joining in other time zones as well. We'd like to, again, thank Strong Towns for hosting and facilitating today. So this evening, the Anchorage Assembly will meet in our final regular meeting of the year. There's multiple housing related items on the agenda, including our final housing action plan, what we're calling our strategic plan, as well as the proposal to make 3 and 4 plexes easier to build in our neighborhoods. So it's hard to believe that Housing Action Week was only 6 weeks ago. So we didn't even have snow yet on the ground when we welcomed Chuck to Anchorage. Looks a little different now. If you could look out my window, you'd see a big pile of snow.
I'm jealous.
Oh yeah, well you'll experience it soon enough. So we were happy to have Chuck up for our Housing Action Summit, where we unveiled our first draft of the strategic plan, our Housing Action Plan. But it's actually the result of over 18 months of housing policy work along with our community partners and neighbors. Our housing crisis affects everybody. It's no wonder that people are so engaged in this conversation, for sure. In those 18 months, the Assembly has already accomplished a lot. So we've allowed accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, in parts of the community where there's already housing. We've eliminated parking minimums, and we've cut some red tape that has allowed us to convert hotels to housing. So with those investments this year, we were able to convert over 300 units of new low-income housing in our hotels. And there's still obviously a lot of work to do, and that's what the Housing Action Plan is all about. So what we're working on is really having housing at all levels, so everyone who wants to live here can find a place in our community. So today, as I mentioned, the plan will come before the Assembly at our meeting tonight. It's really intended to be the strategic plan that guides the vision for the Anchorage Assembly's work on housing. And of course, we have limited tools. We can write and amend our local laws. We hold the city's purse strings, so we can allocate or appropriate money to these priorities, and then we can convene folks. And then also, we have really been excited to get so much input and so much partnership with other organizations, other people who share these same goals, and then really excited to hear the perspective from Chuck and from the Strong Towns folks who have been kind of working alongside communities across the country, and it sounds like in multiple countries, to really move the needle on these big housing problems that a lot of us share. So with that, I will kick it off with a few questions, and then I understand that your team will also be collecting questions from the audience. So the first one is around the plan itself. So not having to get into all the details, but I know, Chuck, you've seen this work in a lot of communities. So you saw the first draft of our housing action plan, and then knowing that it's on the agenda for tonight, just kind of asking, what do you think makes a good strategic plan? You know, what helps guide a community forward? Thank you.
It's a good question. One of our board members, John Reuter, actually said to me once, and he said many things that I think are very brilliant, but I think this is the one that on this one has really stuck with me. He said the complexity or the detail of a plan needs to be directly proportional or inversely proportional to the number of people who are going to be implementing it. So if you are going to be, the example that he used was, if you're going to be assembling a, like a new cabinet, you ordered some product from IKEA, it's going to have very specific instructions on how this step goes, and then this step goes, and then this step goes, because it's only going to be one person putting it together. You don't have to communicate or collaborate or find like joint things. But if you're doing a strategic plan, if you're doing a comprehensive kind of vision, it actually can't be that detailed in terms of the implementation steps. It has to really be a broad vision that brings people together. So we talked about this in the context of putting together our own organization strategic plan. And if you look at our strategic plan, I want to say it's like 8 pages. And it outlines who we are. It outlines what we're trying to accomplish. It outlines the programs that we use, how we're going to measure success, and some overall like value statements about our organization. That document, both the 2015 version and the 2021 update to it, have been absolutely pivotal in driving everything that we do. When I look at cities, I think sometimes cities, in a strategic plan, add too much to it. It's almost like the consultants get paid by the word or paid by the inch in terms of like the thickness of it. There's some like impressive things if we can add a bunch of graphics and add a bunch of statistics. But the reality is, the more focused we can be, the shorter we can be, the more people will read it, the more actionable it will be. And, I think more focused we can be. When I looked at yours, the stuff that you had put together that I saw 6 weeks ago, you packed a lot into a very short number of pages. And by being very specific and direct on what you were trying to accomplish, I think what it will do when you get into actually implementing it, it's like, here's the steps we're going to take, and the thing we're going to do here, and the ordinance change we're going to make here, and the policy we're going to take here. There's not going to be any confusion about what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to get more homes built. You're trying to get homes built at a lower price point. You're trying to have them happen everywhere in every neighborhood. These are things that even when you run into implementation problems, you're going to be able to fall back on a strategic plan that is, I think, very focused and well worded and exact, kind of the exact sweet spot you want to be. So I hope that answered. I hope that, to me, short and sweet, and deal with the philosophical issues, and then let's move on. Let's keep going.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. And yeah, you're not a plant for sure, but I know you spoke highly of our plan, so I really appreciate that perspective, and like you said, really keeping it short. In that same vein, I'll move on to the next question because I want to make time for other folks as well. One thing that's come up is the discussion about how housing policy is complicated, right? Where we're seeing interest rates going up, we're seeing high costs, and that's always been true in Alaska, but has gotten worse over the last few years. And I think there's a tendency to think, oh, this is just a blip. Like, if we ride it out, if we don't make the other changes, we'll be fine. And so I just wonder if you could talk really about where you see, especially zoning and land use policy, fitting into the big picture. Because I think there's some healthy skepticism of that, given all these other factors and how much they matter as well.
Yeah. And let me do a slight wording nuance. because there's a difference between complex and complicated that I think is really important. Machines are very complicated, but they have a predictable motion to them. You know, if we press this lever over here, it will move this thing over here, and there's like a relationship. Complex systems have ambiguous relationships between things and nonlinear relationships between things. So we can push this lever over here many times and it has no effect over here. And then one time we push it and it has a dramatic effect because the relationships are not clear. Housing is a complex system. And so what we see is that local housing prices are buffeted and affected by many, many different things, which themselves are part of complex systems. Interest rate policy is one of the most complex things we do. You shift an interest rate, you're in a sense like changing financial gravity to some degree, and things start to respond in like weird, complex ways that are unpredictable for PhDs working at the Federal Reserve, certainly unpredictable for you and me trying to do housing policy at the local level. You add on to that these layers of other things, like local zoning policy, like state housing subsidies, like transportation and all that. And it creates the situation where it's really, really hard to paint cause and effect. That being said, there are a couple things that are very clear and that we see repeated over and over again. When we can make it easier for people to build housing, what we do is we make the adaptations to all that complexity more localized and easier to kind of follow through with. We allow people more options for responding to all of the complexity and all the weird ways that it will manifest. What we ideally want to get to is a position where I'm not saying we don't care what the interest rate is, but it doesn't affect us because our market is more localized than that. So things like zoning reform, where we allow more types of housing in more neighborhoods. Things like regulatory reform, where we make it easier for people to get through the permitting process, make that permitting process more predictable, have it have to go through fewer gatekeepers and actually, get the housing from submission to approval in a much, much quicker point of time, just reduces that friction that people have in responding. I think things like training incremental developers to work locally, things like being involved in how some of these things that we really want to see are financed. These are opportunities for local governments to step in and take this complex system that's going on up here and kind of buffer your community from it by making your housing more localized. So I think I answered your question and then talked a little bit more about other things that weren't part of your question, but hopefully we got there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And speaking of questions, I'll just remind folks, I'll ask one more, and then I see the Q&A is filling up. So if you do have questions, there's a Q&A button on the bottom. You can submit a question, or if you are having trouble finding that, you can put it in the chat, and then I understand the Strongtown staff are managing that. So my last question is, really thinking about the other topic on our agenda tonight, there's two ordinances to make basically building 3 and 4 plexes, small multifamily housing, easier to build. So places where they're actually already zoned and allowed, but the other rules around our zoning don't really make it feasible to do that. So a lot of the kind of concerns we've heard from folks are in some of those neighborhoods where they're allowed, but they're not being built, and concerns about increased density and especially increased street parking. And these include some neighborhoods that have, they're on a grid system, they have that curbside parking, but there's already a challenge, especially they're downtown. So if you're near a downtown event. So my question is, also thinking of winter communities like in Minnesota, like here, what should we be thinking about when it comes to the impact of putting more housing in existing neighborhoods, and especially that issue of parking? And again, knowing we have a bus system, but it's not robust enough that it will transport everybody where they want to go.
Yeah. This is a good question because it's a practical question. It's the kind of question that a council member would ask. Because, anytime you make a change, what happens is that you go through this series of, well, okay, what are what are the negative impacts going to be here? And what are the negative impacts going to be here? And can we offset that? Can we offset this? Part of why we ask that question, and I'm not suggesting putting this on you. I'm suggesting these are the reasons these questions come to you as a council member. Part of the reason we ask these questions is because we've become we become a little bit desensitized to the current urgency in front of us. If you were homeless, you would not be worried about parking. You would be worried about getting more homes, right? So that's like on the far end of like urgency, right? If we were very, very sensitive about things like housing price, housing opportunity, the idea that, we want people to be able to get into a home that is priced well for them, invest in our community, build our community wealth, build our community capacity. If we were very sensitive to those things and less sensitive to parking, what we would say is, let's get the housing built and then we'll figure out the parking. What we do today is we say, let's make sure we have the parking, let's make sure we have all these other things. And then in the context of that, let's build housing. And you can see where that has gotten us. I mean, that has gotten us to a position where housing is scarce, it's unaffordable, and we have all kinds of other things, like we can't support a transit system. We have vastly too much asphalt on the ground to maintain. We have bizarre amounts of parking, excessive amounts of parking. So I don't think the questions that you're asking are in a sense solvable. If the question is, how do we add a bunch more housing and not have any conflicts over parking? But what I'm suggesting is that we actually tune our sensitivity meter from one extreme, which is we're very sensitive about having enough parking. We're very sensitive about traffic congestion. We're very sensitive about where do we put the snow. We're not very sensitive about whether we can actually get people into houses. And we just tune that sensitivity to the other side. Let's get people into housing. Let's get more housing built. And then let's find ways to deal with the other things that come up, because those problems are actually more solvable, have less urgency to them. And in many ways, housing kind of makes some of the solutions easier, particularly when it comes to transit. Having more people in a place actually makes it easier to have a viable transit system than not. So I didn't answer your question, but I'm going to say to all the people who share that concern or are going to come to you with that concern, it is a concern I would be least sensitive about.
So then go ahead, Anna.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and now those are my questions for now. So I wanted to give opportunity to others.
That's great. The first question that came in was, I think, a very concrete question around this, Chuck, from Bob Butera, who asked, can you address the proposed 1,000 home big lot subdivision proposed for Eagle River? So here's a concrete plan to build 1,000 homes on big lots, and to raise the question of, what should Strong Town's approach be to this?
Well, I don't know the 1,000 lot subdivision on Eagle River. So I can't speak specifically about it. That being said, this has got to be some type of horizontal expansion. You're not going to put 1,000 lot subdivision, within an existing neighborhood. When I was in your very nice city, it is obvious to me, and I think obvious to everyone, and I've heard a lot of this feedback since I've left too, that you have more roads than you have the money to maintain. You have more pipes than you have the money to maintain. You have more stuff than you know what to do with in terms of public infrastructure. And so the idea of adding more to me would be a non-starter. Like, why would we go about doing this? If we were going to add 1,000 homes, I would jump for joy. But to me, it would be 1,000 homes that would be dispersed throughout your existing neighborhoods. You really need the energy in your existing neighborhoods. You really need the investment in your existing neighborhoods. And, we can argue about, I think we can have a consensus around the idea that we need 1,000 new homes, but 1,000 new homes out on the edge, I think is going to do more harm to you than it's going to do good, particularly financially over the long run. I get how there's this temptation to build them now because we have a housing crisis and we need to build more homes. I actually don't think this will solve your affordability problem at all.
And then the question from John Thurber, John had his hand up and then posted in the chat here is, how does the municipality balance the desired impacts of infill redevelopment while guarding against the downsides of gentrification? What can you do to buffer against that, to mitigate the replacement of modest housing units with what he describes as luxury housing units?
Yeah. So let's take that head on. Gentrification, and I'm going to define it so that we're all on the same page. Gentrification is investment plus displacement. So we invest in a neighborhood, and then we have the people who are in the neighborhood move out or be displaced from that neighborhood. A lot of people try to avoid displacement by not having investment. So we're going to disinvest in a neighborhood in order to not move people out. And to me, that is the wrong idea. How do we get investment in a neighborhood without having people be dislocated? And the only way to do that is to do it incrementally, to do it at a pace and at a rate where we don't radically impact the market prices because of the way that we're investing. A lot of times we'll look at a neighborhood, and I'm going to use numbers that may or may not feel applicable to your neighborhood, but I'm going to do it for ease of math. If we look at a neighborhood full of $100,000 homes, and then we say that, well, new homes being built on the edge are 500,000. Oftentimes we measure as success in our brains, getting the $100,000, poor, cheap home or whatever torn down and replaced with a $500,000 home. And that looks like, that is success in our mind. From the municipality standpoint, from the local government's balance sheet standpoint, that would be akin to like your 401k going from 100,000 to 500,000. Like no one has that expectation because it's a bizarre expectation. It just doesn't make any sense. If you look at your 401k at 100,000, what would be really, really amazing next year is if your 401k went to 110,000. Like that would be a 10% rate of growth. It'd be higher than what you would expect if you buried the money in the backyard or bought a CD or did some low risk type of investment. If we go back and look at the $100,000 house, if we can make a neighborhood full of $100,000 homes become a neighborhood of $110,000 homes, we've increased the wealth in that neighborhood by 10%, and we haven't displaced anybody, but we've done something like really amazing from a tax base standpoint. The way that you increase a neighborhood of $100,000 homes by 10% is to do small things that actually make people's lives better and allow additional housing. These are things like backyard cottages. These are things like accessory apartments in existing buildings. These are things like converting single family homes into duplexes. They are not things like tear down 4 homes and put in a 4-story apartment. That actually changes the underlying dynamics of the neighborhood. It will increase that one site from 100,000 to 500,000, right? You'll get that big leap on one site that you can measure. But it does so by stagnating the rest of the neighborhood and essentially ultimately leading to a development pattern that gentrifies, that displaces people as you grow. Grow incrementally, and the people there will accrue the wealth themselves and not be kicked out. And you will have a development pattern that creates broad-based prosperity as opposed to isolated transactions across the landscape. Fair, Norm? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. And also shared a link to 5 articles that we've written a while back with a sort of a roundup on gentrification and some of the questions around investment and what does it mean for a community to be displaced from where it has traditionally lived versus to experience the benefits of investment over time. We have a question from Kyle who said the municipality that he's in is geographically separated. And so, for example, Eagle River and Girdwood, they are distinct communities, but they are dependent on the municipality for many services, including public transit. How can residents of these essentially suburbs participate in the development of active living in the broader community without being a detriment to the budget that would improve services to the urban core that powers our city's economy? How do you, in a sense, become a net contributor, even in a suburban setting that actually makes it very difficult to contribute in that way?
It's a tough question. How do I live in a suburb and have that be financially viable for everyone? And I have a flippant answer. Maybe we should start with that. Like, don't ask for any services and pay a lot higher taxes. I mean, that would be the easy answer. The further you go out, the more costly it is to provide that service. The further spread apart you are, the more costly it is to provide that service. Um, and so, to me, when I'm looking at it through the municipality's lens, often, what I will advise a municipality to is like provide great services to your core neighborhoods. Those are your neighborhoods that are the most financially viable, the most financially productive, where you get the highest return on your investment. And if you're going to cut services out on the remote edge, where you either are A, not providing very good service today, or B, losing lots and lots of money providing service, or likely C, all of the above, right? So for people who live in suburbs, this is always a very interesting question, because often the question is, well, I like living here. I want to continue living here. I don't want all this infrastructure to go away. I don't want the city to do the thing that is in their own taxpayers and their own, community's interests, which is kind of short my services out here. What do I do? And I, you know, I would like to have a happy response to that, but a lot of this is just math, and you can't provide a high level of service out to an area without either a very, very high level of financial productivity or a very high level of taxation, unless you're going to do it at a significant loss. And that is what the city's doing today. If they're providing those services out to the suburbs, they're doing it at a huge loss. And there's no easy way to fix that. There's no, I if you said we want to make our suburb more viable, you need to, start working on things like, how do we have a walkable neighborhood here? How do we have a downtown here? How can we connect that in a node to another node, like the city center? Those are all things, but the reality is that the marketing brochure of most suburbs is the exact opposite of that style of growth and development. So I don't know the exact situation, but just philosophically, it's really hard to have your cake and eat it too.
Just want to pick up a comment that Matt has made in the chat here about the impact of snow removal and the challenges that come in with respect to that, in terms of, he said in Anchorage, we get a lot of snowfall, roads quickly narrow, and that creates a real challenge to provide an adequate level of service for people, particularly people experiencing homelessness within the community that are forced to walk or forced into the roadway. Within the context of, I mean, whether there is a way to provide service for those that are pedestrians to be able to clear sidewalks. You wrote an article a number of years back that I think really resonates: the cost of an extra foot. Can you talk about how our transportation decision-making really binds our hands from being able to provide a deeper level of service that would be of benefit to a greater number of people?
Well, let me put it like this, in a very like on the ground specific way. I walked around a lot of your neighborhoods and the streets were bizarrely wide. And when I asked the reason why the streets were as wide as they were, the answer I got was snow storage. Okay, we can choose to store snow on asphalt. In other words, we can take ground that would otherwise be turf, grass, shrubs, like name whatever cheaper thing that you want, dirt. And we can, at extremely high cost, make that asphalt so that we can store snow there. Or we can just leave it at like a much lower cost. If you have the article, The Cost of an Extra Foot, basically looked at the idea of, for every foot wide you make a street, you are taking, and I just did turf, for example, like grass, right? Which there's cheaper ways to do it, but let's just say grass. You're replacing grass with asphalt. So take, 6 inches of topsoil, and some, granular borrow underneath. I'm an engineer, so like, we spec all this, and you can go and put it in the turf on top, and you take all that out, and then you replace it with bituminous, aggregate, base, compacted, all this stuff. Every time you do that, every foot you make it wider, there is a cost to that. For some reason, you have in your brains in your city that we can only store snow on asphalt, like on a paved surface. And that doesn't make any sense. Why don't you just store it on grass? If you did this, you could actually have a nice sized street, an area where you could store snow, and then an area where people could walk. And the snow storage would actually serve as a nice buffer between the traffic and the people who are walking in the winter. And in the summer, it could be a nice green buffer between the same two things that would make the walking very nice. I've seen this done in other parts of North America. I've seen this done to some degree overseas. Those are places where vehicles tend to be smaller. So I get like there's that aspect of it. There's a little bit of a chicken and the egg kind of argument. But yeah, you have created, in a sense, like a caviar situation where Anchorage snow must be stored on asphalt when it doesn't make any sense financially to do that. You don't get any benefit from doing it that way. By the way, I made this comment to some people there, and I got like puzzled looks, like, what are you talking about? And I go out and walk around and look at it and just like meditate on it for a little bit. Most of that pavement does not serve any function for you beyond, in a sense, ease of snow plowing, which again is a kind of like a champagne luxury right now. It's not where I would spend my money.
And I want to also bring Anna back onto the stage as well. She had further thoughts on the comment or the topic we were just chatting about as well. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a couple bits of local context because I know folks I see the active chat there. It is true, excuse me, we are a city, well, a municipality really that has multiple communities within it. And so they're not suburbs in the sense that they're separate jurisdictions or cities, in a metro area. But they are most of them. So the Eagle River, Chugiak area, some places on the hillside that aren't organized communities, but in their own service areas. And then Girdwood, it is tricky because some things are area-wide services that we all pay for. Other things, including snow plowing, for some folks is really a localized service. And so I see a lot of comments in the chat. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I think it is a conversation about, what benefits area wide, right? So if you're paying in a service area, and I think Anna Boson mentioned this, we all drive on roads in Midtown or downtown, or, we all drive through the middle of town. And so historically our city's been set up to say, if you live a certain amount out, you don't have to pay into those services. So I think that's an ongoing conversation. The other thing, just to briefly add about snow plowing, I was just looking at the city of Buffalo, New York, famously gets a lot of snow, has very high level of service, that they don't mess around with snow either. And I was looking just at the physical area. So they have, I think, about 1,500 lane miles of streets, and that's a little more than we have as far as city roads. So we have about 1,300 that the city maintains, and then 1,300 state roads, not just highways, but state owned and managed roads. They are in about 40 square miles of land. We're in over 100 square miles of land. And so I was reflecting on the fact that, again, when you build things far apart, your snowplows just have to drive more miles to get anywhere. And that's true for our police as well. And so to the point of, where do you store your snow? We've basically created a large area of flat surface that we need to move the snow from. And that's a challenge. So anyway, not to say that it's easy, and it's certainly an issue, but just for context, we are very spread out.
I was able to spend some time in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is a very astounding. It's a city that I really had some fun in. When I drove there, I drove into a blizzard, and I thought as a Minnesotan that I experienced blizzards before. Oh my gosh, the lake effect snow is just bizarre. Like the level, they got 18 inches one night and they're like, oh yeah, this happens for like 6 weeks straight. Because they just get this continuous lake effect snow. Their streets are narrow. They deal with it. They've made do with it. And I found it very fascinating the way that they approach it.
Let's switch gears to your thoughts on a land value tax and whether there is room in the pursuit of a land value tax for an addressing of some of the basic challenges that our communities face.
So Norm, I know that you're doing the hotshot thing where you're looking up stuff, or somebody is sharing it as we go. There's a video that I did a while back on the land value tax. I don't know if we have that, but we certainly wrote an ebook about it that we can share. I have this, someone wrote me a note today on a YouTube video or yesterday, like, why don't you talk about the land value tax more? I don't talk about it much because of two reasons. One, it requires this kind of big statewide philosophical shift in most places. And it's just not, it's not, those kind of things are not the things we get bogged down in. We're kind of all about like, what do you do with the stuff you got on hand? Like, let's go, go, go. And this is more like a big philosophical issue. The other thing is that people who tend to talk about the land value tax or like they bring it up right away, tend to be almost fanatical about it, almost religiously. Like a fanatic, Winston Churchill defined as someone who can't change their mind and won't change the subject. And yeah, I love the land value tax, but it's one of those, to me, it would be like a tool in a broad toolbox of reform. It would not cure cancer. It would not solve Mideast peace, and it would not fix everything wrong with our cities. That being said, the land value tax does one important thing that our cities need to do right now. So let me explain what the land value tax is and then explain what that thing is. A land value, right now, where we use property tax, we are assessing, we go out and we assess the value of the land, and then we assess or we value the value of the improvements to that land. And so your taxes are based on your total property value, the land value plus the improvement value. So if you have a $50,000 lot and you build a $450,000 home, you are taxed based on having a $500,000 piece of property. If you have a $50,000 lot and you do nothing with it, you sit there with nothing on it, you are taxed at having just a $50,000 lot. So you'd be taxed essentially 10% roughly. There's formulas that make it a little bit different than that, but 10% of the value that the person with the house on it would be taxed. When we look at things like snow plowing, when we look at things like building sidewalks and roads, when we look at things like providing police and fire protection, when we look at, all the different services that cities provide, a lot of them can be broken down relatively, simply into per foot kind of services. In other words, just by having land in the city, you incur a cost, and that cost is kind of proportionate to the amount of land you have. Snow plowing is a great example of this. If you have a 100-foot lot and it has a home on it, and you have a 100-foot lot and it's vacant, the cost to plow the snow in front of your 100-foot lot is the same whether you have a home or a vacant lot. Yet the person with a home is going to pay 10 times the amount of taxes as the person with the empty lot. Okay, here's the thing that the land value tax does really. The land value tax shifts from allocating taxes based on that improvement value plus the land value to just looking at the land value. The improvement value is discounted. It goes away. It's not counted. And so what this would do is, if you think of taxes as being spread across the land, it would spread it across the land in a way that would tax vacant lots as much as used lots. Okay. Here's why this is important for where we're at right now today. The biggest financial problem that cities have today is that we have built too much stuff and we've not built enough wealth and productivity to take care of the stuff that we've built. We put more roads in place, more pipes in place, more drainage systems in place, more streetlights in place, more parks, more libraries, more, like, just go on and on and on. And we've not built enough tax base to actually sustain that. And so what we need to do is we actually need to increase our financial productivity. We actually need to build more stuff on our existing infrastructure. Right now, if you go out and build more stuff on your existing infrastructure, what happens is that your taxes go up. It creates this disincentive to do that. It also creates an incentive to not do it, because the longer you can, in a sense, wait to develop, the more your land will be worth when you do turn around and develop it. In a sense, the more everybody around you is subsidizing your long-term land speculation. This is what that video that I created shows. It's a developer, and he's got a lot in the middle of town, and he's just waiting for the right time to sell. And he's really, really happy because the city's investing in all this stuff to make the city great. And all he has to do is hang on until we get through all that. And his lot's worth a whole ton, doesn't pay much taxes in the interim. And then he can sell at this much inflated price. Right now, one of the things we've experienced, particularly over the last 2 decades, is that there are not a lot of good, safe investments in the marketplace. Even now today, if you are an asset manager, you look at the stock market and you say, this is way overvalued. You look at the bond market and you say, this is way overvalued. Kind of the best investment that you can make is to buy land in improving neighborhoods and then hold that land for a long period of time, experiencing a low rate of taxation and a high rate of appreciation year after year after year, while everyone else does all the hard work of making your land more valuable. And then when you get out to a certain period of time, sell it at overinflated prices into the market. And because the holding costs are so low, you can just hang on to it for a long period of time. This is all counter to this kind of joint project we have of us building a city. This is counter to what our goal should be as a community, and it's actually harmful to us as a community. The land value tax, in a very kind of like jujitsu way, shifts the taxing formula so that the land is taxed, not the land on the improvement, and it creates all kinds of incentives to actually sell your land, put it to good use, make more valuable use of it, not sit around and let it be idle, not sit around and wait for everyone else to make your property more valuable while you hold on at a low price. It actually fixes the market incentives that stagnate neighborhoods. That was a really long explanation, but like I'm in. But at Strong Towns, we don't spend a lot of time on it because to get it approved, you have to go to the state capitol. You have to convince everybody there that you want it approved or allow cities the authority to do it. Then you have to go to the city, convince them that they should do it. The incentive of people whose taxes will go down is much, much less than the incentive of the people whose taxes will go up. So Norm, if Anna and I's taxes would go down 10%, but yours would go up 300%, Anna and I may show up at the council meeting and say, hey, we really like this. We're going to get a 10% tax cut, but that may amount to like $90 or $100. And like, it's, like, okay, I'm not saying that's nothing, but it's not going to change our life. But if your taxes are going to go from $50 a year to $500 a year, you're going to get really ticked off and you're going to show up and you're going to be mad, especially if you're a developer who owns, 100 lots, or you're going to own 20 infill lots. That's a big, that wrecks your business model. You're going to show up and complain. And so getting it approved at the state is hard. Getting approved at the local government is hard. These are things that we support and cheer, but we don't spend a lot of time on. Is that fair, Norm? I mean,
I think that's well said. And I shared that article from the New York Times as well about the new generation of what are called Georgists, people that are advocating for it, really sort of struck by the idea there is this other approach. And yet that is the challenge of many fanatics, I think, is that you can latch onto a really great idea and really want to run with it, and then just hit brick wall after brick wall. And part of it is realizing there's other ways to go around this wall that perhaps will help us. Chuck, a question that was submitted is, how do we know, and how does housing reform actually make housing more affordable? So if we make changes to our housing approach and allow for housing reform, does that actually make housing more affordable?
If that's all you do, I think you'll be disappointed in the results, right? Like if we change the zoning code and the parking code and we walk away, I think you'll be frustrated by the results, right? Because there's a lot more here. I mentioned when I was there that we were finishing up a housing book. I'm actually doing copy edits today. So it is coming out. We're going to do an announcement here in a couple of weeks, but you can actually pre-order the book now at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and whatever. Escaping the Housing Trap. And I've been trying to simplify things down for our communications people internally, because when you write a 300-page book, they want the two tweets that will go out. So like, what are those two tweets? And I've simplified part of it down, here's what we're recommending that places do. The first is we have to do those reforms. We have to fix our zoning code. We have to fix our building code. We have to fix our permitting and regulatory process so that the kind of housing that we're trying to get can get through that easier. The second part, though, is that we actually need to train local developers. We need small incremental developers that can work on this stuff, and they need a community of support that can help them accomplish these things. The places that we've seen, like South Bend, Indiana, where they've taken the time to invest in this. And I'm not talking about investing huge amounts of money. I'm just talking about doing some basic training for people, providing them a network of people, providing them kind of the social space to meet and help each other. If you're a developer, you need a sheetrocker, you need a painter, you need a roofer. These people start to talk to each other and create this ecosystem that's outside of the big developers. This is, pennies on the dollar you're spending with massive, massive impacts. We need to do that as a second step. And as a third step, there's all kinds of ways that cities and philanthropy, people who are interested in these issues, can leverage their financial power to actually direct capital into the types of projects and the types of neighborhoods that we want to see these things happen. Whether it is doing, partnering with homeowners to assess improvements. So we're going to get a new cottage and we're going to actually run it through the assessment process and use that approach to finance it. Or doing things like co-signing on loans in neighborhoods where local banks would not normally be interested in investing, but they can't qualify for the types of loans that would get sold onto secondary markets. These are things that cities have the capacity and the power to do, and philanthropy certainly has that too. So to me, those three things are strategies that go together. Reform your local codes. Yes, I mean, that's like a prerequisite to all of this. It's like preparing the ground to plant the crop. Get the incremental developers in place so that they can start to work and start to deliver some of these products that are not being delivered in the marketplace today. And then third, look at ways to be a creative force for financing those things so that this kind of flood of capital that comes into the 1,000-home development on the edge, we can get capital that actually starts to flow into the neighborhoods where we need it to, into the type of projects that we're trying to see happen. So the question was like, should we see this? It was like something along the lines of like, how will we know we're succeeding? When you're seeing, we need to build a ton of, and this is what I said when I was there too, we need to build a ton of starter homes, backyard cottages, accessory apartments, entry-level type of housing that would be very, very, very affordable. The idea that, and housing people call it filtering. I think you could think of it colloquially as like trickle down. The idea that if we build a bunch of rich housing, that poor housing will become more affordable, to me, I think is an incorrect way to look at this. We need to build a bunch of entry-level stuff, a bunch of stuff that just by its nature will be affordable. That's how we start to shift this market locally.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump ahead to Maria's question that Heather chimed in on as well, which was great. Asking the question about how do we encourage builders or contractors to be willing to take on small jobs that are intended to help maintain existing or even aging housing stock. They share that many companies are not interested in working on modest homes. They want this. And Heather comments also that the cost to upgrade old homes is really complicated by the fact that you have to bring it all up to code. And there's a huge cost to doing that. And it becomes this prohibitive sort of process. She says safety is paramount, but the cost of upgrading and expanding or adding another potential living space is very off-putting to the average homeowner. When we look for this to be a way that we add additional homes for people to live in within existing neighborhoods, what are some of the things that can be done to try to help to address that and to create this ecosystem of active local builders that are very, committed to building in existing neighborhoods, even within the work of rehabilitating and upgrading existing homes?
Yeah. I feel like this is a hard question, and it does not have an easy, simple answer, right? It's a little like asking the question, I don't want to buy my hammers from Home Depot anymore. How do we get neighborhood hardware stores? And, you're like, well, a neighborhood hardware store has a completely different ecosystem that supports it than Home Depot does, right? Home Depot is getting its hammers from who knows where, China. They're outsourcing them. They're coming in on a ship. They're getting broken down in a warehouse. They're getting distributed through a website. Your local hardware store, I don't even know what the sourcing on that stuff would be. It's a completely different market, completely different transaction. One of the things that we've done, and we've done this in the name of efficiency, right? Efficiency and resiliency, I think we can look at as opposite ends of a spectrum. Go read your Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile or The Black Swan, and you will get a lot of explanation of that. In the name of efficiency, we have made the delivery of housing into almost a Henry Ford-esque kind of product. That has certain advantages when you're building the same house over and over and over again. If the idea is to go build 1,000 homes out on the edge, you want a sheetrock contractor that can come in and predictably put the sheetrock up in home after home after home. You'll also have someone who will deliver the sheetrock and set it up for them. You'll also have someone who will come after and tape it. You'll also have someone who will come after and paint it. And you'll have almost like an assembly line, and it becomes very efficient in terms of delivering that single product. What those crews will not be good at, and what that developer or that person doing that will find it impossible to do, is to go door to door in a neighborhood and do custom type of work. It's almost like I'm struggling for the right analogy, but it would almost be like you've got your jacket on right now, and you want you want it hemmed, or you want it taken out a little bit, or a different button put on, or what have you. We're almost to the point where if you don't know a good seamstress, and there's one in my community here, if you're not friends with her and know her, or if you don't have someone in your family who does this, good luck getting that done. You might as well just go buy a new jacket. That's where we're at with housing today. And oh my gosh, we can't throw away houses the way we throw away jackets, right? We can't throw away houses the way we throw away hammers. We have to get off this idea that somehow we will make things affordable by making it vastly more efficient. We will make it affordable by making it actually more localized and more customized. So when I talk about South Bend found themselves in a position, this is South Bend, Indiana. South Bend found themselves in a position where they had a lot of homes that needed a lot of love, but they had all developers that were providing stuff at scale, efficiency. And they invested the time and the energy and the resources in building this ecosystem of local developers because they needed someone who was sensitive to and able to provide that kind of custom product in the marketplace. When we can get people who can do the custom work, and I'm not talking about custom cabinetry, that people pay a premium for that now in very expensive homes. I'm talking about, the ability to go out and do small additions, the ability to go out and do small renovations, the ability to do very small projects. When we can start to build that capacity, and building that capacity is not just about having the skills to do it, but it's about having an ecosystem of support around you. It's about having access to capital. It's about a bunch of things that places like the Incremental Development Alliance are working to train people on. When we can set that up, you create a different broker, a different player in the market that can start to provide these things that we all look back and see are absent. And instead of looking at our neighborhoods and our homes as disposable, they become places that we can give that love to, and we can improve, and we can fix up and make better and expand. But if we don't actively go out and build this ecosystem of developers, what we will find is that all the good people will wind up working for the large development company on the large project that scales. They'll wind up with a business model that is about scaling and efficiency. And I'm not suggesting that these aren't good people. I think they are as individuals, but as people who are able to deliver what the community needs, they almost become worthless in a way because they become highly specialized and very good at providing small, specific things at scale, which is not what our neighborhoods need most desperately. So since you lose them and lose their capacity in your market. And that has, a deleterious effect on providing good housing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, Norm? I feel like I packed a whole lot in there to that answer, but
And now I know I can't find a good source of hammers. So
exactly.
yeah. I've got a question from Mike here. The primary feature in our community of Girdwood is non-occupied housing, second homes, and full-time short-term rentals. He mentions in 2023, 3 multifamily developments were completed. However, only one of the 24 units are primary residences, while all the others are unoccupied. How should our approach and priorities change in that context?
It's really interesting. There's a lot of debates over this. There's a lot of debates over the impact of this. I've seen a lot of people, and a lot of these are advocates that I really like and admire that want to see more housing built, insist that this is a tiny fraction of the market. It doesn't matter. It's not affecting home prices. I've seen other arguments, and this often comes from like financial circles, saying that there's a surplus of homes. We've actually overbuilt. There's a lot that are unoccupied. There's a lot of shakeout that is needed in this market, and things like higher interest rates sustained for a longer period of time would actually shake this out. I tend to be more sympathetic to the financial argument of this and think that what you're seeing when you're seeing a lot of unoccupied homes, when you're seeing a lot of Airbnbs, when you're seeing a lot of secondary homes, that these are downstream of some of the macro financial policies we've had to boost asset prices, to boost wealth in wealthy households. And in that sense, I feel as local leaders, when we go build the 1,000-unit subdivision, we are in a sense enabling that, or enabling is probably the right word. It's not something that we're begging to have happen, but it's something that we're allowing to have happen. And I don't really know is the cost of preventing it. I mean, I would not approve the 1,000-unit subdivision on its face because it's a bad investment. My motivation would not be to prevent the rich guy who wants to own a second home, subsidized by the taxpayers of Anchorage to own that second home. That would be like a side effect of the policy. I feel like the best way you address this is the 3-step approach that we've talked about. I mean, the idea of loosening up the regulations for cottages, starter homes, accessory apartments, all the kind of base level units that we want to see throughout all of our neighborhoods, make that easier to build, create that ecosystem of local developers, and then help them get the financing that they need to make those types of investments. If we can do those 3 things, I think that this this macro derived problem of vacant units and, Airbnbs and what have you, to the extent that it's real. And I think that it's real, but there's a lot of people who don't. To the extent that it's real, I think it starts to solve itself. It becomes less of a factor. That would be highly debated. If I were in a conference of YIMBY housing activists, they probably would have booed me at some point in that answer. So I'm saying that's my opinion. I think it's not without controversy, but I feel like a lot of that is, I mean, when you talk to people who are in that situation, economists would call it the wealth effect, right? When we take your portfolio and we juice it with low interest rates and quantitative easing and, 2 decades really of propping up the asset market, you get weird, crazy investments that aren't localized and make no local sense.
Mhm.
Because they're macro investments. Money needs a place to flow.
Mhm. I think that's a perfect place to, well, perfect. It's a complex place to wrap our at the top of the hour here, but I do want to ask Councilmember Broy if you would share some closing thoughts and mention some perhaps particular calls to action, including the fact that February 21st to 23rd of this coming year, Chuck's going to be back in Alaska. He made sure that this was on his calendar to be able to spend the time, and I believe the primary event is in
I did.
Anchorage, as well as additional events in Fairbanks and Juneau. And so don't let him, I guess if he starts looking for property, then you'll know that you've really made a mark on him. So, but Councilmember Anna.
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly. First, thank you so much for being here, Chuck, and for the Strong Towns
Oh,
folks
yeah.
for organizing this. It was really great to reconnect, and again, happy that you're coming up with the design forum in a couple months. So thank you again. And then to our Anchorage friends, just a reminder, a couple big things on our agenda, actually 3 items. One is the housing action plan. So that will be item 10B5 on the agenda. If you're a regular watcher, then you know that that means it's part of our consent agenda, but we will pull it and briefly speak to it. There's no public hearing on that, but just to say that's going to happen early in the meeting. And then more importantly, later in the meeting, we have items 14F and 14G, which are both public hearing items. One is the ordinance making zoning changes to, again, make it easier to build 3 and 4plex buildings. And then the next one is around building code. So basically doing the same thing, but looking at 2 different chapters of our code. Those will come up later in the meeting. So, if you want to come testify in person, then get ready for a late night. But we will have public hearings. You can come to the assembly chambers, or you can still submit written testimony by email, and I will put that in the chat. So again, and this is not the last thing we're going to be doing on housing. We got a lot of great work going. So also stay tuned for some good work in 2024. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's very nice to chat with everybody again. I did have a great time in Alaska, didn't I, Norm? I came back and I'm like, this was awesome. It meant a lot to me, and it's nice to chat with you again. And I'm looking forward to being back in February. There's a lot of great momentum there right now. And there are a lot of people working urgently on these things. And there's a lot of very smart people doing a lot of really thoughtful stuff. And we're just happy to support that wherever we can. So please keep doing what you can. And we'll talk to everybody soon.
Yeah. And we'll be sure to share the chat and the resources that are available there. Certainly, I give you lots of links to share in the Strong Towns website, but if you want to find more information, just explore it, and you can email Chuck or myself. My email is norm@strongtowns.org. If you have further questions, be happy to continue to connect with you. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, and have a wonderful holiday this season, and strength and much warmth and light to all of you. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye.